Hi, we're the Chris's, and this is how to find a DID specialist. Now, just to be sure that you understand, we are a peer, we have DID, and we are a life coach. But today we're going to help you find a therapist. And of course, we can't be held responsible for the therapists that you find. We just want to help you figure out a good method for looking for therapists, good places to look for therapists, what to look for on their profiles as little clues for what to seek out to try and find a good therapist, as well as some tips for things to ask during a therapy interview so that you can choose a better therapist. None of this is foolproof. Therapists are human. They make mistakes. There are good therapists. There are bad therapists. Hopefully these tips will help you find better therapists. So the first thing we want to talk about is why you might want to look for a DID specialist rather than a DID expert. It's a philosophical difference. Somebody who specializes in DID has a tad more humility, I guess, than somebody who thinks they're an expert. We're the experts in our own bodies. I don't think a doctor is an expert. I think a doctor is a specialist. So it could be a cardio specialist, for example. One might say somebody is a world-renowned cardio specialist, but I wouldn't call them an expert. It's one of the reasons they call it a practice. You're never done. Nobody's ever done. There's always another doctor who knows a little something different about the heart than that cardio specialist. So I don't call them experts. And I think we are experts in our own body and in our own system, in our own plural system. So I don't think that we should hand over our power to somebody outside of our body. I think we should consult with them and then figure out whether it works for us. And that goes for what I'm saying too. You can use what I'm saying in the same capacity. I have a lot of experience helping people find therapists online. And if this doesn't work for you, listen to your own inner wisdom and take what works for you and reject what doesn't. Why would I say you might want to look for a DID specialist, and now I'm about to tell you why you may not want a DID specialist. Firstly, finding a DID specialist is kind of like looking for a needle in a haystack. On none of the websites that I've looked at, not a single one of them does anybody hang out a shingle saying, I'm a DID specialist. So when people are looking for a DID specialist, they're often coming up empty-handed. That's the first thing, is disappointment. If you look for a DID specialist, if you call up your insurance company and say, hi, I need a DID specialist, you're unlikely to get anyone. And we had this problem. So because we had our blinders on, back in 2001, we went back to our original therapist. It wasn't working out. We said, okay, we'll have to look for a DID specialist, call up our insurance company, get nothing, and had no idea what to do. It's like, okay, well, if somebody doesn't specialize in what I have, then I guess there's nobody that's covered under my insurance, so I didn't see anyone. That's the first problem. There's other problems which I can go into, but that is a huge issue. If you look for a DID specialist, and I'm in New York City at the time, we're not talking about a place that has no therapists. I could walk in my home neighborhood and see somebody's hung out a sign on their lawn saying that they're a therapist and they're working out of their basement apartment or something. So it's not for a lack of therapists. It's for a lack of DID specialists. They're very rare. And there's issues with who's attracted to hanging out that shingle, which I can talk about in some warning section later. Why do we look for a trauma therapist? Because you can separate DID into two distinct issues. One is the trauma. We nearly all with DID, I'm not talking about plurality in general, but with DID or OSDD, we have something called CPTSD, which is complex PTSD, and we have many people in our head, parts, people, whatever you call them, alters. So we have this, what I'm going to call a syndrome. We have a syndrome of being, having multiple layers of PTSD that is all tangled up in a big knot, on top of having many people in our system. And the problem is that many of the people in our system have PTSD or CPTSD in and of themselves. So that gives a third layer of complication to it. You have PTSD, you have CPTSD, and now you have CPTSD amongst a group of people in your system. So really, when it comes down to it, once you get people problems taken care of, then you just have a group of people with CPTSD. So you have a group of people with CPTSD, and then you have problems that are common to family units and small groups of people or large groups of people living in close quarters who all have problems. So you're bumping into each other's baggage, you have walls between you, you have communication problems, you have trust issues. Those are not problems you need a specific specialist for once the specialist realizes, oh, these are people problems. This is like a mediation issue, or this is a trust building issue or a teamwork issue, and not so much we have to fix the people in and of themselves, like the fact that there's people. We don't have to change the fact that there's people. No more than you would change a family unit. There's 5 people living in a house together and they're not getting along. You don't make the people leave. It's like, well, you're not getting along, then all of you leave. No, you help them figure out what's going on and what does everybody really want to say and things like that. So you have people problems, and then you have all these layers of PTSD. Who specializes in PTSD? Trauma therapists, trauma specialists. So that's what we look for. We look for trauma therapy, trauma specialists, and you got to figure if somebody has 10 or more years in the industry, and you don't want too many years because then they'll be retiring soon. But if they have 10 years of experience, 10, 15 years, then they've bumped into people with dissociative disorders before. They had to have. So, somebody will come to them for PTSD issues, and after a year of working with them or however long, they find out, oh, you're plural. And do they stop working with them and pass them to someone else, or do they work with them in spite of it and figure out the differences in how to change therapy so that you're dealing with somebody with dissociative disorders and DID? So looking for a trauma specialist makes sense, and that's something your insurance company will know, and that's something you can find online, which is what I wanted to show you today. My tips for that is look for people who specialize in trauma, look for how many years of experience they have, and really make sure their profile covers trauma. I'll explain that when we're going over the screens. And then after that, when you have your first session with the therapist, you have to interview them. We're going to go over some questions you might ask and some suggestions for how to come up with more questions. But you really need to interview your therapist. They're a professional that you're hiring to help you with your life. And if they're not a good fit for you, you should find another specialist. You should find another trauma specialist. Another thing, in addition to looking for trauma specialists, is to keep in mind any of your comorbid issues that are important to you. Do you have an eating disorder? Do you have borderline personality disorder? Or have you been, misdiagnosed with it? So maybe you have both. Maybe you have autism. So you may want somebody who's aware of different issues. If you're trans, if you're queer, you may want to look for a queer-friendly therapist, trans-friendly therapist. If spirituality is very important to you, or holistic medicine and using complementary therapy, if your religion is very important to you, you may want to look for a therapist that can deal with that. The other thing is also to keep in mind in the back of your mind, if you're interested in merging or you're not interested in merging, there may be therapists who already have biases that you may want to weed them out or include them specifically because they have your bias. And what I like is looking for someone with lived experience. So sometimes you can find a hint in their profile or on their website, in their About Us, About Me page. You can sometimes find a hint whether or not they have lived experience. So they may mention that they went through trauma and that's what inspired them to go into trauma. But they're probably not going to tell you what their diagnosis is because there's a lot of bias in the industry against people with a diagnosis being therapists. The hints may be there without actually saying outright, I have had or I have a current diagnosis. But if you find it important to work with someone with lived experience, you can look for those hints. And the other thing to keep an eye out for, and I'll show you in the tools, is the tools they use. Some tools speak loudly to how much this person has actually worked with trauma. So, for example, if they have EMDR, it may be that they've worked with trauma and they're not just checking boxes on their profile. So let me show you some of these tools. I have the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation, lovingly known as the ISSTD in the plural community. So the ISSTD is in front of me right now. So this is the ISSTD new website. They just put out an update recently and sent out a plea to their therapists to update their directory entries, which is never boding very well for the information. I'm gonna go for my area. I'm gonna look in the 15-mile radius. I'm not gonna check any of these. I've tried it and then nobody comes up, and I have a feeling nobody may come up anyway. I've tried for probably 4 or 5 people in the last couple weeks looking for therapists on this site and had no luck finding anyone. So I'm not going to check any of the boxes. Okay. Just going to look in the zip code area. Like, does anybody come up? All right. Find members and 1. Okay. So there's 1 therapist in my local region. And to tell you the truth, that's probably 30 to 40 minutes away from me. Not as the crow flies, it's close, but there's mountains in the way, and it's kind of convoluted getting there from here. So it's a good response, but it's a little long to get there. Okay. So I'm going to open their profile so we can take a look at the type of information they give. Okay. So if these are important to me, they work with people with cancer, they work with heterosexual and lesbian clients. That's interesting. But they don't look, it doesn't look like they like gay men. Did you forget to check some boxes? And I don't know what it looks like on their end. I don't know if the back end of this limits the check boxes. So, yeah. So this is a little weird. So they deal with lesbians and transgender and heterosexual clients. They deal with any age group. They deal with these. Okay. They offer creative therapy. And it looks like no insurance, which is interesting. And they've checked off ethnic populations. So, okay. Anyway, so this person, I don't know what that is. See, I'm not liking this profile, but maybe it's just their profile is not well filled out. I don't know, because there were no other options in my area. Maybe if I increase the radius. Let's go back. Maybe make it larger area. No, see, because there's just not that many options in there. This is everybody within a 40-mile radius, and I'm only an hour and a half to 2 hours outside of New York City. So there's a lot of therapists here. All right. So I'm not so thrilled with that. Oops, I was researching. Okay. Then there's the International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies. They also have a tool, but it doesn't have as many little checkboxes. Like when you go to the search options, if you do have, let's say, 10 pages of results from your search, then you can go in here and you can start narrowing them down by picking other things. I did pick English. But you can go in and narrow it down by other things. So they have a tool, which I have open here, Find a Clinician. I'm going to put in 10940 again. Let's put a lot of miles in there. And let's just see who comes up at all in my area. I mean, I got results the last time I was looking. So let's see. Okay, so there are people, but there's, I mean, even 40-mile range, and I took out a lot of the search options, or 50-mile range. And I took out a lot of the search options, and I still only come up with, like, a half dozen. So then, I'm going to click out of these and open up a couple of the results in other tabs. Okay, we'll take the first three just to take a look and see what kind of information we see here. So, psychology, PTSD, but nothing here really screams dissociative disorders. PTSD, secondary, which is probably BPD and such, I think. If it's secondary structural dissociation issues, I'm not sure. I'll have to look that up at some point, figure out what that is. Yeah, so these three people were not saying anything at all. And we're getting down to the Bronx. So we're talking about, it's an hour drive with no traffic for me. Like a really solid highway hour to get to the Bronx. Hour and a half. Probably an hour and a half. So that's pretty far. So because I was coming up empty-handed looking at the trauma specialist websites, I mean, these are the places that trauma specialists would join. But we want a specific type of trauma specialist. We don't want just any trauma specialist. And they're coming up pretty empty-handed. There's not that many people coming up. Then I start going to larger websites, that people don't have to pay a yearly fee and stuff. So I'm going to close this window. I usually end up using Psychology Today. But this last time I ended up on Good Therapy, and I found somebody that looked good, and I'm going to show you what a pretty good-looking profile looks like. They didn't say they were a dissociative disorder specialist, but there were things on their profile I liked. So I will point that out. Who else did I find? I was looking in Long Island for someone. This person also had looked good, and I opened their... Okay, this is the APA website. Here, let's go back. I opened theirs here, so I can come back to theirs, but let's look in my area again. And let's go more miles. Be reasonable here. Okay. Now I'm like 60 miles outside of New York City, so there should be a lot of results. It's 2 pages. That's not a lot. So again, I did already select trauma and PTSD, and let me show you that. So here it shows from A to D. So I had to click See More and find trauma PTSD. All right, and if too many pages of results come up, select more issues. Like I could select for anxiety and panic disorders and trauma and PTSD, right? So now I've got 2 things selected. Your insurance may or may not be in the list, so you might want to check that. Especially, like, only check these things if you have too many results to further limit them. You definitely want to look at the trauma, PTSD, because this is all psychologists that belong to the APA. So there's going to be way too many results, and they're not going to fit at all. So picking the trauma and PTSD, it means that people check the box, though. So that's the problem. The problem is there are box checkers. I'll show you some when we come across a profile that is obviously a box checking profile. All right, let me pull this into a new window so we can open these in tabs and take a look. Now, if you have an eating disorder, this person might look really good. So if you have both DID and an eating disorder, this would be somebody I would say, oh, yeah, let's open that one. These other ones, well, this one looks maybe chronic illness, depression, grief, loss. And we'll open this one, Paul Green. This is just random person. Okay, firstly, they're in New Jersey and my insurance wouldn't cover them. I can only stay in New York. So even though they're within the 50-mile radius, they're taking me into another state. So I wouldn't be able to see this person, but to show you issues on their website. So you have to show more in their practice areas. That looks promising. Addictions, depression, family, life transitions, marriage, divorce, self-abuse, sexual abuse, rape, stress. So they didn't select too many things. And because I'm a sexual abuse survivor, that's at least promising there. Let's see what their treatment methods are. So they have cognitive behavioral. I don't see anything here, and I don't know if this website has an EMDR checkbox. So if these are checkboxes on the other end, they may not be able to select certain things. And then their top practice areas, they only picked the 3. So it's anxiety and panic disorders, eating disorders, and trauma. 34 years in practice. For us, that's a red flag. That's too long. Now, normally it would be like, oh, this is great. They have a lot of experience. But because it takes 10, oh, good, they're a member of an EMDR association. That's good. But because it takes 10 or more years to work with DID, unless you want your therapist retiring while you're working with them, you probably want them to be in the 10 to 20 year range. Although people are working later and later in life now. They're retiring later for many reasons. But it also could be a burnout area too. So I would say 34 years is not good in terms of DID, seeking out a new therapist. If you're starting in the beginning, that's too long. If you're looking for a new therapist and you've worked with somebody for a while and either they retired or you don't have that much further to go, you've done a good bit of your trauma work and so on, but for whatever reason you've moved or something and you need a therapist for 5 to 10 years, then it might be okay. But just that's something to keep in mind. You want experience, but you don't want too much experience. I'm sorry to like, here I am, I'm 50 years old and I'm basically saying be ageist. It has nothing to do with how old they are, really. It's not that I think 34 years is a bad thing. I'm just worried about them retiring, and then you'd be disappointed and have to change therapists again. And if you're in a very tender spot at the moment, that can be devastating. So it's more protective than bias. It has nothing to do with their age. Their age is fine. But yeah, they have EMDR. So that's a good sign there. And they don't have a website. If they did, it would be here. So they don't have a website, but you could possibly look up their name in a browser and see if you can find their website. It may not be listed, but they may actually have a website somewhere. And their hours, directions. Sometimes there's a little bio, which I really like a handwritten, typed out bio. This one doesn't have it. So for a lot of reasons, I might pass this one up and keep going, because it's not really speaking to me, if you will. This is Mount Kisco. It's across the river. It's probably about 45 minutes to almost an hour away from me. There are other issues. Okay, I'm queer, so this is good. And they have this also. So I was wondering, when I saw they came up for PTSD and then they had chronic illness, depression, grief, loss, I was like, okay, yeah, that is definitely speaking to trauma. So let's see, the rest of their profile. All right, good on the queer stuff. And I don't see anything trauma specific in their treatment methods, although long-term is a good sign, because goodness knows we are looking for long-term. Now they have a biography. So this is great. So we skim the biography looking for, either their, like clues as to their ideology and their actual direct experience. You want to make sure somebody isn't too broad, that they're really drilling into trauma. So you might get some clues here as to how much they really focus on trauma. 15 years is perfect. That's around, a good amount of time in the field without being close to retirement. And then they have a website. So we could actually go to their website and double check. Now, what's interesting is because, especially when you're looking at the trauma societies, their profile may scream, hey, I do trauma. And then you go to their website and it's very generic. That's not a good sign. You want to keep seeing that consistency of working with trauma through everything that they do. So grief, loss, chronic illness. I'm not sure about peak performance. Identity, okay, conflict resolution and relationship concerns. It's not too bad. It's not completely out there. But peak performance, I'm not sure about. Like, what's that doing there? Featured services. Nope. Okay. By appointment. And there's no about page. Oh, menu? About page. Oh, that's a nice long biography. So we're not going to read it, but this is where you would look for, all that trauma experience and some idea of their philosophy. This is where you might find hints as to whether they're spiritual, what their religious beliefs are, anything like that might be here. So this would be something you would read and look for the clues. And you might also get some hints on, in this case, this person's actually put what I would call a CV, curriculum vitae. They've put a lot of their learning, their CEU credits and things, all their different training. And then we have this person. So they have trauma and PTSD, anxiety, panic disorders. Okay. This website does not have dissociative disorders in the more practice areas. That I've never seen it. So you're not going to see it here. The Psychology Today site does. And then you can read, and 39 years. So this person's almost 40 years in practice. If they're not on the verge of retirement, I don't know what's going on. And then they have their own website here and here. So we could look at their website. I mean, I'm not saying it's a definite don't go to somebody who has that much experience, but, if you're looking for 10 years of therapy, maybe don't go to somebody that has that much experience. Yeah, I was 10 years old when this person started. Suicide prevention, trauma and disaster response. That's good. So, you never know. I mean, if you were just looking for a diagnosis, this would be the type of person to go to. They could probably take one look at you and, be like, oh, I know what you are, but yeah. So, I mean, with this much experience, like with 40 years in the industry, if they have a long list of specializations, I wouldn't doubt it. You know, you've seen a lot of things, a lot of comorbidities, and you've dealt with a lot of issues by then. So I wouldn't be hard on them for checking a lot of boxes once they're 40 years in the industry. But yeah, okay. So let's get out of the APA website. So APA is all psychologists. So you won't find as many MSWs and things like that. You're just going to find psychologists, which has got its good points. But, you know, it also means they spent longer in school, so they started out older. So the retirement age thing is definitely a concern when you get to 40 years. All right, so I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to show you somebody who looked pretty good. Okay, this person's profile really spoke to me in terms of having a good amount of experience in the industry. Let's see how long, 25 years. So they're towards probably the top of where I would look. But they have chronic illness and pain management, which is an issue for me. Grief and loss, life transitions and sleep disorders and so on. They had cognitive behavioral. They didn't have long-term here, but they had meditation and relaxation, which I liked. The EMDR was one of the things that spoke to me here because it means they work with PTSD for sure. And they like an eclectic approach, so I like that. And they do biofeedback. That's neat. I looked at their website and I liked that. This person was even better. It says only 8 years in practice. I don't think that's true. What was it that I saw that I liked? Here we go. Conducted research on complex trauma such as victimization, abuse, addiction. So this was one of the few profiles that actually mentioned complex trauma, CPTSD, and that was one of the things that caught my eye on this one. And I went to their website and they have a whole practice. So there's several people there, but I would try and aim for the person whose name is up here and see if I could get to them, even if they're the head of the group. See if you can get to work with them. But yeah, these profiles basically stink on the APA site. I mean, there's more people, so I was able to find people, which is good. But I didn't love the results I was getting. Then I went to Good Therapy. And I found this person whose profile really screams trauma work too. And I looked them up on Psychology Today and figured out why I didn't pick them when I was on the Psychology Today website. Because they didn't put in their specialties here that they work with dissociative. Oh, no. Here it is, I think. This is the section it would be in. Mental health, mood disorders. There's also dissociative disorders here. You can't search on it on Psychology Today. So let's do this. I'm going to look in my area. And right, issues. We need trauma and PTSD. So Psychology Today website is the one I tend to send people to. I'm going to select a few people. This one doesn't have that section checked off. I'm looking for here, mood disorders and personality disorders. See, this is a box checker. I can tell you for sure. How long have you been in business? 21 years. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. It's not 2025 yet. They've been in practice for 21 years, but they graduated in 2004. I don't know if you say so. But yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot for almost anybody, even somebody who's been in the industry for a very long time. No DID stuff. ADHD. They didn't check those boxes. I would read their profile and double check. Yeah, again, somebody who didn't check that box. Oh, here, specialties. It might be in there, but I'm pretty sure it is in the other box. Come on, people. Somebody. Please check those boxes. I want to show you what it looks like when I do find somebody that looks like maybe they dissociative disorders. Yay, I found one. Okay, so here in mental health, you can see dissociative disorders. So when you look for trauma therapy, look for this. I mean, I wouldn't discount people just because they don't have it. And look, 4 years in practice. Really? Okay, so this is a box checker. So, yeah, the minute they say 4 years in dissociative disorders and have all these boxes checked, I don't think so. I mean, I'm not saying anything wrong with this person, okay? I'm sorry. Like, I feel like I have to fade out people's faces. This is not, I'm not trying to say, like, you're a bad person. I'm saying for doing DID work and looking for a trauma specialist, this does not look like a trauma specialist. This looks like a generalist. And I don't know why they would check dissociative disorders if they're a generalist. That's really not general territory. So I would worry that they check too many things off. Some of these actually require specific training on the side. 4 years in, that's a lot of extra training. I don't know. Maybe they're an overachiever. I have no idea. Because that's a lot of things to have the additional training in, like certifications in ACT or specific training in cognitive behavioral. These are all like specialty side things that you would take continuing ed or specialized trainings in. Not all of them. I mean, these are not, but the acronyms, the acronyms are things that you would actually be trained in. I mean, you might be familiar with internal family systems therapy and theory, but would you really be specialized in it yet? I don't know. I'm not sure. Mood disorders and personality disorders. And that's another problem. So if somebody's not up on the times, they might think that DID falls under personality disorders still and not have like caught the DSM-5 Kool-Aid, or 4. So 14 years in practice. Dissociative disorders. Diana Rubin, you have 21 years. Awesome. Sounds really good. You have queer stuff checked off. You have a reasonable amount of treatment approaches. And although I don't see EMDR, but you never know. The person might have gotten training since they filled out the profile or may have just not had a box to check at the time they filled in the profile. So that might be somebody to look at. 20 years of experience, play therapy. Always LGBTQ. They took the time to say it again, which is nice. If you really find that important, if they say it in both places, that's a good sign. And they didn't go crazy with checking things off, so that's really good. And this is the only mental health issue they have checked. So this would be a person I would definitely check out. They're reasonably priced if you needed that. They take a good number of insurances. So I would definitely check out this person if these are issues that you need somebody to help you work on. I would go further into looking into them. They do not have a website listed. It would be here. And they're like right in town. They're in the same town I'm in. So if I didn't already have a therapist, I would look into this person for sure. And nope, They don't have the dissociative disorders checked off. They are over 10 years in practice, which is good. And I would just be looking through their profile, and I don't see much about trauma specific in there. I mean, even though it's listed in a longer list, it's not necessarily a specialty. Whereas I think for Diana Rubin, it looks more concentrated, more like, domestic abuse, trauma, sexual abuse. A lot of these things point to somebody who's really working in trauma issues. Offices at home. That could be a red flag for you, and it might not be. That's up to you. That helps keep the prices down, which is really good. It costs a lot to have an office. Okay. So that's Psychology Today's website. And some of the things that I look for when I'm looking at profiles. I definitely go to their website. I definitely look at what they've got going on. I think I chose my therapist because they had a website, and because the website, I may have had Diana Rubin on the screen. I may have been looking at this person, but I may have skipped this person in favor of somebody who had a website that actually spoke to me. Okay. Good Therapy, I skipped over. They had a pretty good interface. Oops, sorry, banging the mic. Let me see if I can get it to respond. I'm getting the beach ball of doom here. Just a quickie, because I don't remember how good the search was here. Oh yeah, I think on this one I had to click advanced. So I can show you what that looks like. In case you don't get extra options when you first look at a website, it's good to know that if there's an advanced link, you can use it. Sometimes it's right underneath the search box. This one already has it on the sidebar. But right by the search box, there might be little words, a little link underneath it that say advanced search that give you options. So make sure you use that if you can. So here I was able to check trauma or abuse. And that already slims down the number of responses. There's one page. That's good. You want 1 or 2 pages if possible. Oh, see, here are people in my quote unquote in my area. Liberty's a little bit far. Sparta, New Paltz, Ramsey, Suffern. Okay. So yeah, 1, 2, 3, about 5 or 6 people came up. Goshen's close by. Englewood Cliffs is not close by. That's in New Jersey. New York City definitely doesn't work for me. Okay. But these, no, not Smithtown. So these 2 are in my area. I'm going to look at this person because I don't think I know them, and that name looks too familiar. I don't want to look at somebody I know. This is just entirely based on profiles. It's absolutely nothing personal. I don't know these people. That's why I'm skipping certain people. I don't know them. That's a long list. Wow. Okay. What do we got here? ACT. Okay. I do not see EMDR. Exposure therapy is not good for DID. It would be okay to go to somebody who has that listed. Okay. So that's not a red flag for that, but it would be something to make sure that you draw a boundary and say, no. I have DID and PTSD. I don't have a phobia. We're not doing exposure therapy. You got to be very careful with exposure therapy. If somebody's pushing you to do that, they may not be aware of trauma issues versus phobias. Yeah, I'm not getting the feel that this person is all that trauma focused from what I'm seeing in their profile and the stuff that I'm seeing in their bio. So I wouldn't go to them based on that. war and military. So this person definitely deals with PTSD. Let's take a look at him and just see if it sounds more. That's a long list too. Anger management, systems theory. Okay. That might be families. I don't know what that means in terms of systems theory therapy. Very interesting way to put it. That could be great in terms of applying systems theory to plural systems. It's good. I've done some work on applying systems theory to therapy, systems theory to self-help for multiples. So yeah, it could be good, but I don't see anything here that really says PTSD to me. There's no EMDR. Not that that's the only choice, mind you. Let's see. But my wartime, okay, so this person may have had PTSD, possible. And it created their passion. So if it's one time PTSD, they may not understand chronic PTSD. So that would be another issue. So just to keep that in mind. Okay. So I'm gonna hide these guys. So those were the online tools. That's apa.org, goodtherapy.org. Psychology Today has their Find a Therapist feature. Those are the ones that I found were the best in terms of number of results. I definitely like the Good Therapy and the Psychology Today profiles better. They're more detailed. I think the APA website leaves me feeling really cold and clinical, where the other two sites are, I guess, more inviting for the person to actually fill in a profile. So they actually write more in there. Maybe they're paying for it or something, so they actually pay more attention to it, where with the APA website, it's a side benefit of belonging to an organization. So maybe not everybody's filling in a profile, so there's less results, as well as the results not necessarily being as good. So now I want to talk about interviewing your therapist, the types of things that we were looking for in the profiles a little bit, and then the red flags. So interviewing therapists and looking at their profiles, if they have EMDR listed, that's a good sign that they work with PTSD, but not necessarily that they work with CPTSD or DID. Working with EMDR with DID requires modifying the procedure. You can't just rush in and do EMDR the way you would with a single incident of PTSD. You can start on EMDR very quickly with just regular PTSD. You need to modify the process to some degree, kind of layer EMDR into the 3-step model of working with DID. And the same thing kind of goes for CBT. It's cognitive behavioral therapy. EMDR is eye movement desensitization something. What is the R? And then there's DBT, dialectical behavior therapy. These are good things as tools in the toolbox. It speaks to the seriousness of a therapist if they've gone through the extra training and certifications to get these. It means they're really dedicated to their craft, so that's good. They need to be trauma-informed and DID or dissociative disorder informed in order to use these with somebody with DID or OSDD. So during your interview, you would specifically ask them how familiar they are with dissociative disorders and whether or not they're aware of how to modify the tools that they have to work with dissociative disorders without creating what's called flooding, which is basically opening up the floodgates and overwhelming the client with too many recovered memories and too much recovered or too much flashbacks or emotional dysregulation. That's what they call it. Sorry. So too much emotional crap is really what it means. Too much emotional crap. So you don't want a therapist who's going to dig for the deep trauma first. You don't want a therapist who's going to use a technique that opens up everything, and now all of a sudden you've got like all this outlandish stuff that you never even suspected was there that comes flooding back to you. The best type of therapist will help you get stabilized first, then move on to trauma work, and will work with what you're ready to process. So it may be, I remember this incident, but I don't have all of the feelings from it. Like, I remember it, but I remember it very detached. I'm missing portions of this memory, and maybe you'd work on that first because you already know what happened, so you kind of suspect what feelings are missing. It would be less traumatic than opening up some new can of worms. It would be something you're like, okay, I'm ready to process this. I need to process this. Or I have one of my triggers was coffee. And I knew where it came from. So I already understood what it was tied to and why I was getting triggered, at least to some degree. So it's like, okay, I really need to be able to sit down at a table with somebody drinking coffee without getting all hyper aroused and anxious and ready to flee the room and things like that. So, can we work on that? So I picked what to work on and when, not my therapist picking what to work on and when. Another thing is when it comes to both BPD and DID, and many people with DID have comorbid BPD, you want to look for the therapist's biases about it. What are their beliefs, their preconceived notions, and are they compatible with how you believe your own issues to be? So if you mention DID and they start talking about how, it's a bunch of parts and it's really one person and that disturbs you, that's not the right therapist for you. You're not likely to change their deeply held beliefs about it. Not to mention, you can also just be confronted with that doesn't exist, it's not real, in which case you definitely need to find a new therapist. And the other thing with BPD is it's a very emotional diagnosis. It's a very emotional diagnosis. So it's definitely leaning in the emotional dysregulation area, the emotional crap area. So if somebody has had bad experiences with a client who gets overly emotional with them, they may have some deeply held biases and or their own PTSD regarding that client's behavior towards them that can get in the way of working with you. So you may want to just go with your gut instinct when you talk about these things. Somebody in there can look over your shoulder and observe the therapist and watch their reactions and look for clues to how they really feel if it doesn't come out of their mouth. Like, did their eyes narrow? Did they frown? Did they get nervous and start moving funny in their chair? Like, what did they do? Like, turn the tables a little bit and make sure you observe your therapist or your proposed therapist during the interview. How do they react even being interviewed? Right? Because that's not going to be the usual client that walks in their own power. And I'm hoping that you listen to, I'm working on the conference right now, the Plural Positivity World Conference, and I have one on self-advocacy, activism and self-advocacy is one of my sessions. And in there I talk about being in your own power. And in other sessions, I also talk about returning the power to the client in the therapist relationship. So in that case, does it disturb your therapist, this proposed new therapist? Are they disturbed that you're interviewing them? Like, find somebody in there who's got some chutzpah, and is really willing to go in and say, look, these are the things I need to ask you. Like, before we even talk about your questions for me, I got these questions for you. And then I'm sorry, I didn't like your answers. I'm out of here. Like, are they disturbed with you walking in and owning the session? Because they really shouldn't be. You're there to hire them as a consultant. They're not there to fix you. They may be very used to and have grown very comfortable with, especially in the 15 plus year range. They may be very comfortable with owning the power in the session. You want to remind them that you own the power and keep the power. Just do your best to be as empowered as possible and really ask the questions. Hand it off to a guardian or protector to do, or whatever you need to do to make sure that you get these questions answered. And I'll give you some ideas for actual questions in a moment. So you're going to want to keep an eye on how they react to being interviewed. And do they try to keep taking the power back or controlling the session back from you? Make sure you ask about the things that are important to you. And look, I get it. We're all so trained to think doctor knows best and to walk into these sessions and just hand our power over and let them control the whole session. I totally get it. It is really ingrained in many of us. It's a big disservice our society has done to us to teach us to be helpless when it comes to these things. So if it takes you more than one session to get these questions done, don't worry about it. Do it as quickly as you can, as easily as you can manage it, because you're looking at possibly being with this person for 10 years. If you have to go through 2 or 3 or 10 sessions to get these questions done, you have not really lost any time in comparison to the 10 years you'll lose if they're a bad fit, up to 10 years that you'll lose if they're a bad fit. So get in there as soon as you can. If it takes you a session or 2 or 3 or more to get through your questions, just get through them. Make sure you and your therapist are on the same page before, and this is part of the trust building process. If they're not willing to give you control of the session, you got to ask yourself, why? Why can't you give me control of the session? Why can't I ask you these questions? Why are you uncomfortable with me asking you questions? That is very important. So make sure you ask about anything that's important to you. So if it's eating disorders, if it's your religion, if it's if you're, let's say you're polyamorous, and you don't want them thinking, well, you're being promiscuous, so that's self-harm, or automatically thinking you're avoiding some kind of intimacy by having multiple intimate partners. If they have preconceived notions about something about your life that would make you very uncomfortable, you want that out on the table early on. You definitely want to ask about their experience and their qualifications with dissociative disorders, especially if they had it checked on their profile. And you may want to even, if you're comfortable saying it, you may want to just dive right in and start asking them about their preconceived notions and their thoughts about DID. What is your training? How many people have you treated? What were the end results? Are they all still in progress? Did anybody actually complete therapy? These are very fair and reasonable questions. You can't ask their names or, things like that, but you can ask for results, and you can ask for whether therapy ended voluntarily, whether they're still in therapy with them, whether they were planning to work on final fusion, whether it was the client's decision or their decision, like who came up with this treatment plan. Also, if they have that kind of experience, you can ask for a timetable, some kind of an idea of how long it took. Now, it's going to be a mixture of an issue with the therapist and an issue with the client. If the therapist is not helping build the foundations, if they're not spending enough time in stage 1 of treatment with stabilization and building trust between the therapist and the client and building trust within the system, the plural system, if they're not spending enough time there, then trauma therapy, the second stage, can end up taking a lot longer. I don't know how better to put it. If you're not ready, then the amount of damage done by going to stage 2 too early can end up making therapy take longer. That's how to put it. So until you're really ready, and this is why I'm advocating for people controlling their own sessions and spending a little longer before getting to trauma therapy. If you're not ready, don't go there, and make sure you're picking the traumas. And you can see my other videos and podcasts and stuff about this type of stuff. So you want their timetable. Just get an idea. If they're like, well, I've been with 3 clients for the past 15 years and they're still in therapy. That might be concerning. They're still in therapy. They haven't achieved functional multiplicity. They haven't achieved merging. And it's 15 years. There's a point at which it could be the clients, entirely could. They could be SRA survivors and be working through an extraordinary amount of stuff. Or it could be the therapist. And is the therapist keeping them disabled to not have to look for new clients? I mean, it's just a possibility. It's a possibility. All right, I'm going to give you some questions, but I'm going to say one more tip. I know, lots of tips. But if they're a maybe or a yes, and they're not an outright no, or even maybe if they're a no, because you might learn something from it, document when you leave. Document everything you can when you leave the session. That'll give you a nice little break from what's probably very stressful anyway. You get it out on paper or into a voice recorder or whatever, and just take whatever notes you can. So set aside the time to process the session afterwards. Take notes. And you're going to want to also revisit your notes again later, maybe the next day or 2 days later. Revisit your notes and add anything else that's come up to it. So you may have, forgotten to write down some details, or others want to add their thoughts, or maybe you've had a chance to process it and now you're thinking a little bit differently about it, seeing it from a different perspective. So take notes like the day of, immediately after, while everything's fresh in mind. Take notes on whether or not you blacked out and browned out, just take notes on whatever happened. And take notes after you start processing, because it's a lot to take in. It's like if you notice their leg bouncing and somebody else noticed this and somebody else noticed that, and maybe it all adds up to, no, this is a very nervous therapist. What is this therapist nervous about? I don't understand. Were they just nervous that I was taking control of the session, or that I was asking them so many questions, or are they nervous for other reasons? I don't know. So don't second guess any gut feelings you have about them. Write those down too. Just note it all. And then you can go back to it later when you're deciding on which therapist you might want to work with. You can compare notes. You can refresh your memory as to what happened. And if you have any of those weird impressions, like maybe later you can look back and say, yeah, it was there too. It was there at the first session. In this way, you get 5 sessions in and you can say, yeah, this isn't looking like a good idea. There's something up with this person. What you've all been waiting for is some suggested questions, I'm sure. So what kinds of questions, and I know you probably took a lot of notes on questions you would want to ask already, but here's some that I actually have written down. How much experience do you have with DID? How do you view DID as a disorder? Are you fully familiar with the DSM-5 criteria for DID? What do you think of CPTSD versus PTSD? Have you dealt with someone who's polyfragmented? That's a concern for me, so that's written down, but it gives you an idea of the different sub-questions you might need to ask. If this is a concern for you, how do you deal with, have you dealt with someone who is ritually abused? Have you dealt with someone who is psychically abused? Have you dealt with someone who's spiritually abused? Do you think psychology is a mature science? This is one of my questions. This is my personal beef. I'm sorry. I'm reading my personal questions. Do you think psychology is a mature science? So, to explain that one, what fraction of human experiences can psychology explain or encompass at this time? Are you open to looking at human experiences through different lenses? Now, it's funny, I didn't have to ask my current therapist all of these questions. My last therapy session, and I've been with my therapist a year and a half, you'd think she'd know by now, but she's like, I don't know, I've just got this gut feeling, and I have to say this. Okay, when things like this come up, I just have to say them. You may have to go through your energy field and cut cords. For some reason, you're bringing this person into therapy with you as if they're still alive and they're gone and they're dead. And I just have this feeling that you need to like cut ties with them, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, I got it. No problem. You're right. I haven't, we're saying back to the therapist, yeah, you're right. We recovered 2 new children a year ago and we didn't do any decording rituals on them. You're absolutely right. And that's a great reminder. Thank you very much. And she felt so like, I'm so sorry to bring non-therapy stuff into, non-psychology stuff into the session. And I'm just like, that's why we hired you. Like, what are you kidding? This is perfect. Thank you for the reminder. We really needed this. We picked her profile. We picked the person we work with specifically because their profile and their, not their profile so much, but their website definitely spoke to us as her being spiritual and intuitive and more trauma informed than other candidates. So we specifically picked her for that open-mindedness to other things. And because we do ART sessions, which is accelerated resolution therapy. And in the beginning, she reminded us a few times, like, don't forget to call all of your helpers and other things, whatever they are. Don't forget to call them to help you and support you. And I'm like, oh, yeah, you're right. Hey, and I'm calling my Reiki guides and I'm calling my shamanic spirit animals and stuff and having them help support me through the sessions. And that's working really well for us. So, we appreciate the reminder because we get so caught up in the psychology lens when we're working with our DID that sometimes we forget that we have all these other tools in our personal tool chest. We're a Reiki master, we're a shamanic practitioner, but because we're compartmentalized, it's not always the same person with those tools or with those attachments who's taking the therapy session. So we may be all caught up in talking about alters and dissociation and all the technical psychology geeky stuff and totally forget that we have all these other tools. So we appreciate having somebody who's able to look through multiple lenses. So that's why one of our questions was about that. And we never needed to ask this therapist that question because it was just so obvious that she was on the same page, but she feels guilty about it. So she's like hyper apologizing, like over and over again. And we're just like, no, this is exactly why we hired you. It's like, no, this is perfect. So, it's important to us. This is what we need. And it falls in with our belief system very strongly. Now, you may have a completely different need. You may need things couched in terms of a particular religion. You may need religion and spirituality completely wiped from the whole session. You may need psychology lens only. And that's all okay. This is nothing to feel bad about or to think there's something wrong with you. This is just how you need the information packaged that's being given to you. So you need a therapist who's comfortable with packaging information in the way you can hear it and the way you're ready to receive it, if that makes any sense. You need to be on the same page. Now, if they're flexible and adaptive so that if things open up or a different person in your system needs it said different way, If they're open to that, that's even better. If they're more flexible and adaptive to your needs. So there may be specific people in your system who need to hear it one way and others who need to hear it another way. If they can put it in kids terms for the littles, and they can put it in religious terms for the religious person, and they can put it in psychology terms for the geek, that's even better. But these are the questions you need to come up with. So you got to hear some of our questions. Some of them are very generic. Some of them are very specific. There are other people online who have lists of questions that you might want to find and check out. So you can look up questions to ask your therapist. I think we have on kinhost.org, we have at least a couple of articles about empowerment, about hiring and firing therapists that have some questions and links to questions. So you can look up hiring. Hiring would be a great word to put on Kinhost, or interview. So if you look up hiring or interview on kinhost.org, I'm sure that there's articles and questions and things that'll come up to help you out. And this has been a lot longer than I thought it would be, but I hope it really helps you find a therapist in a way that's gonna help fill your needs. I know that there's an extreme lack of DID specialists out there. Oh, I left out that part. Right. Let me grab my notes. So yeah, I want to put this at the end. You can quit now if you want to quit while you're ahead. You can quit now. I'm going to talk about therapy abuse issues. So this may be too much for some people. So yeah, flee if you need to, but I'm going to talk about the red flags. And so we're going to be like touching a little bit on therapy abuse issues and things that I say in this section. I am not talking about any specific therapist. I'm talking about the experience of sitting in lists and channels with many, many people with DID and the complaints they have, as well as things that are brought up at the conferences about therapy abuse and various issues that just, they come up in the industry. So I'm not pointing to any particular therapist. I'm just talking about people within the industry, individuals who are good versus bad, and just like anywhere else in humanity, there are bad therapists. And so I'm going to talk about bad therapists. So please feel free to leave now. So one of the reasons I do not think people should look for DID specialists, there are going to be DID specialists that are in for all the right reasons. There are going to be very good DID specialists who maybe they have DID or recovered from DID, and now they're living either as integrated or as functional multiples, who have personal experience and they want to give back and they have their heart in the right place. That can happen. There are good people out there in the world. There are just people, they have a knack for this. They knew somebody, or whatever their inspiration was to get into this specialty. Then there are the ones that hit all the red flags. There are the ones who are not in for the right reasons. So when there are bad people in the world, they need victims. They need to own the power and control over others. And to do so, they may look for vulnerable clients. There are other specialties they can go into, but if you go into DID as a specialty, you are sure to be surrounded by very vulnerable people. In terms of your clients or your patients in this case will likely be very vulnerable people with boundary issues, because from the very get-go, from an early age, we weren't taught what right and wrong was. So we still have a lot of confusion, and we lean on our therapist quite a great deal to help us work on reality testing and work on reestablishing correct boundaries. But what if somebody's not in for the right reasons? They may not be there to teach you those things. They may not be there to help you fix the broken stuff. They may be there to take advantage of the broken stuff. So there are therapists who specifically go into specialties to look for vulnerable clients. They may exert power and control. So it may come from a narcissistic point of view. I'm not going to call them narcissists directly, but they may come to it from a need to have power and control over people. There are some people who get a thrill out of hearing the horror stories, so they may dig for trauma that's too deep, and they may dig for it too fast, or be disinterested in sessions that don't talk about trauma. They may really want to hear all the bad stuff and constantly want to hear the bad stuff and not hear anything else. So in that case, they get kind of a secondhand adrenaline rush out of it, just like people who go to horror movies and thrillers to get that fear jolt of internal crack, if you will. It is. It's addicting. It's very heady. That panic energy. So they may actually be looking for clients with horrific abuse so they can get that adrenaline rush from it, that epinephrine jolt, if you will. Another form of narcissism within the industry are the people looking to add notches to their belt. They're looking for personal prestige through their clients. So they're mainly interested in conquering your disorder and running in and fixing you like a knight in shining armor. They want to add notches to their belt. They want to tame yet another wild multiple. So they may be looking for merging over any other thing. They may not be looking to give you a choice. They may just want to do merging therapy and do it as soon as possible, even if it's not in your best interest to do it. There's a prestige within the industry, a little eyebrow twitch that you get from the how many plurals have you brought to full fusion? You know, how many have you helped unify, or whatever words they're using today. This really has nothing to do with the therapist, but for some reason in the industry, it's become like an award in your award cabinet. So if somebody can say, you know, oh yeah, I, brought 10. Oh, you brought 10? I did 15. It's like, it's a whole notch in the belt thing that's pretty gross. And then the other types are the ones who just want to keep the plural, the DID person, disempowered and in constant crisis or undermined. Because the longer you're destabilized, the more they're needed, or because the longer you're destabilized, the longer the checks keep coming into the bank. It's easy billing. They don't have to add new people to their system. They don't have to verify new insurance. You know, if they can get 10 years out of every client, that's very, very lazy in terms of marketing and finding new clients and advertising. It's cheap and easy. It's just a steady paycheck. And these people may have no passion whatsoever, and they're just looking for easy money. They're going to not be very interested in the sessions. They're going to possibly already be burned out or just not invested. They're just not all there. They just want it to be easy. And so they'll keep you stalled, and maybe they won't even go to destabilize you much, but they won't be helping you make progress, really, because they're not interested in progress. They're just interested in getting paid. So I would be careful about those type of people too. It's like, if you want easy money, you just bag some DID clients and you're set. You know, if you could get 10, 20 of them, you just collect the money. So that's a really sad reason to be in that industry. So I would really look for people who have a true investment in trauma therapy, and not so much look for people that hang out a shingle saying, I'm a DID specialist, because all the reasons that people would want to attract those clients There were very, very few of them that are positive, if you will. Somebody who's a trauma therapist wants those wins. They want a couple of those easy PTSD clients to help in a faster way, while still having some of the longer term clients, because they want to really actually help the people. It is very depressing if you are truly invested in helping people get better to be working only with clients that take 10 years to help, or 5+ years to make significant progress with. That would be very depressing. It would lead to a lot of caregiver burnout, a lot of compassion fatigue for the therapist to be working only with clients like that. So unless they're getting wins, it would be an extraordinary person who could be emotionally invested in being a DID specialist and maintain their compassion over the 15+ year mark. It would be extraordinary. So I think looking for somebody who has a mixture of clients is good for them too. It's not just good for you. If they have a mixture of different levels of different layers of PTSD, different layers of depth. I'm not weighing the trauma itself, but people with a single trauma are definitely different than people with layers of trauma. And people with layers of trauma are still different yet from people with layers of trauma and layers of people. Plurals, with layers of trauma and layers of people. So if they're dealing with people with single incident PTSD and helping them, they're going to get those wins that help them work with the people that are longer term. So a mixture of the shorter term clients and the longer term clients is probably very healthy for your therapist. It'll help them stay safe and sane in themselves, which is very important for everybody. I've said enough. I really hope this has been helpful for you and will help people get better therapy faster and make a more informed decision over what therapist to go to. Good luck on insurance issues. Some of the sites, Psychology Today has a good chance of finding you a therapist that's actually working with your insurance. But I don't know how well it works outside of the country. I'm really sorry for anybody outside of the US. Hopefully some of these tips were helpful and you can use them for screening therapists in your area. Oh, also, don't forget, you may be able to actually ask your insurance for trauma specialists rather than DID specialists. A lot of people come back empty-handed when they ask for DID specialists. Skip that, go straight to trauma specialists. See if you can find somebody under your insurance plan that is a trauma specialist. This is also very helpful for people out of the country because in some countries, DID is not even acknowledged. So find trauma specialists and then look at their bios, do interviews, see if you can suss out whether or not they believe in DID. If you can't ask directly, you may ask them, well, what are the hardest people you've worked with? Or under what circumstances would somebody need to work with you for over 5 years? And kind of get like those hints as to whether or not it's okay to bring up the subject. So you can work around some of either the lack of language or the lack of access in your society, your culture. Look for trauma therapists. And I really hope this helps. Please feel free to leave comments and let us know if you have questions. And if you need to find us, you can find us at liberatedlifecoaching.com. We could certainly help people screen and find therapists or come up with their questions to ask a therapist. You can ask us email us, not a phone conversation necessarily, although we do have a free consultation we could do some of this during. You can email us if there was something weird going on with your interview and you want to kind of see yourself write it, and maybe we'll have something intelligent to say in response, but or ask you a couple of questions about it so that you can maybe further figure out whether or not that person might be or is not a good fit. But really, good luck out there. It is very much like a jungle out there, and it is very difficult to find a good therapist that just has the right feel for you. So try to stay open to the work. Unfortunately, it's work. It's work finding a good therapist. I wish it weren't. I wish it were as easy as just put your hand in the bowl and pull out a name and it's perfect. But it's not. So you're going to have to investigate your therapists. We hope you have a great day. We hope this has been helpful for you. And please, 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 whatever you do, take really good care of yourselves and pick a good therapist.